So Mark Palmer, who you'll recall just delivered the invocation, offered the following advice: make sure that Joe Biden is nowhere near Senator Cruz's wife. Well said, Mark. Well good. Ladies and gentlemen, the courageous conservative from Texas, Senator Ted Cruz.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
God bless the great state of South Carolina. I apologize, we're a few minutes late. We just came in from the airport and just got here seconds ago, but it is great to be here. I want to start by introducing my wife, Heidi Cruz. So Heidi is beautiful, she's brilliant, she's an amazing businesswoman. She has terrible eyesight. And she's an incredible mom to our two little girls who will be showing up hopefully about halfway through. They're coming in from Texas. So our girls are on their way as well. And she is also my best friend in the world. Our girls, Caroline and Catherine, are 6 and 4. And they are the precious joys of our life. You know, I think back to about 3 years ago. We were on family vacation with the girls. Caroline was about 3, Catherine was a baby. And we were going along, we're at the beach with another couple who has 2 little girls as well. They're good friends of ours. And Caroline, we were headed off to dinner. Caroline wanted to go in the car with her friends. And there was no space. And she threw a fit. She fell to the floor, began kicking and screaming and yelling. I'm sure none of you have ever had a child. Well, Heidi is tough. And she sat young Miss Caroline down and had quite a conversation with that young girl. And she straightened up. We went to dinner. We went back to the hotel that night. And that night, Caroline was on her knees saying her goodnight prayers. And she looked up and she said, Dear Jesus, tonight we had a situation. And I'm not sorry. But it's not going to happen again. And Heidi and I just stood there biting our tongues at that precious prayer of a sweet little child. But you know, that's why we're all here today. Every one of us is here because we love our kids. We love our grandkids. And we're concerned about the direction of this country. We're concerned about the world that our kids and grandkids are inheriting. Now, we all know what the challenges are. So rather than talk about them, I'm going to talk about the future. 10 days ago, at Liberty University, Heidi and I announced our campaign for President of the United States. In the entire 30 minutes, I said the words President Obama once. We know what's wrong there. It's time to move on. It's time to move on. It's time to bring the country forward to the next level. So what I want to talk with you about today is how we do that. How we reignite the promise of America. Now, what is the promise of America? Well, the promise of America starts with the revolutionary idea this country was built upon, which is that our rights, they don't come from government. They come from God Almighty. And the Constitution, it serves, as Jefferson put it, as chains to bind the mischief of government. And that, in turn, has produced a nation that has been the greatest engine of opportunity and prosperity the world has ever seen. There's been no other country in the history of the world that has allowed so many millions to come with nothing and achieve anything. 58 years ago, my dad fled Cuba. He was 18 years old and he couldn't speak English. He'd been in prison. He'd been tortured in Cuba. When he came to America, he had just $100 sewn into his underwear. I don't actually advise carrying money in your underwear. His first job was washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And he worked full-time. He paid his way through school. He got a job, and he ended up starting a small business, working towards the American dream. Today, my dad's a pastor. My father's my hero. But I'll tell you what I find so incredible about his story. How commonplace it is. Every single one of us here, we got a story just like that. Whether it's us or our parents or our great-great-great-grandparents, that is what ties Americans together. And the promise of America is the understanding that you are limited not by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. Absolutely. Today, for the first time in history, a majority of Americans believe our kids will have a worse life than we do. 65%. That has never been true in the history of America until this moment right now. Maybe the most un-American idea you can imagine. So how do we get back to it? How do we reignite the promise of America? 3 simple principles. Number 1, we bring back jobs and growth and opportunity. We get back to the sort of environment for 6 years we've been in the great stagnation. Men and women in this room understand cause and effect. Every time the federal government goes down this path, every time we see out of control spending and taxes and regulation, the result is stagnation and misery and malaise. And the flip side of cause and effect, every time the federal government goes down the road of tax reform and regulatory reform, the result is booming economic growth. That was true in the 1920s. It was true in the 1960s. It was true in the 1980s. The 2 best levers government has are tax reform and regulatory reform. Tax reform, get the enormous burdens of government out of your lives. The simplest and best tax reform is we need to adopt a flat tax. That's fair, that lets every American fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. And when we do that, we should abolish the IRS. There are over 90,000 employees at the IRS. We need to padlock that building. Take all 90,000 and put them on our southern border. Now, to our friends in the media, that is slightly tongue-in-cheek. But think about it for a second. Imagine you traveled thousands of miles in the blazing heat. You're swimming the Rio Grande. The first thing you see is 90,000 IRS agents. You turn around and go home. And then the second key lever for growth and opportunity is regulatory. Stopping the crushing regulations, the EPA, OSHA, the alphabet soup that is killing small businesses and farms and ranches. You know, I was out in West Texas once, and I said, you know the difference between regulators and locusts? And I said, you can't use pesticide on the regulator. And this old farmer leaned back and said, want to bet? And the simple and most important regulatory reform we can adopt is we should repeal every word of Obamacare. Now, there are a whole lot of people in Washington, sadly a whole lot of Republicans, who've given up on doing it. Every 2 years they'll campaign on it. But they have accepted that Obamacare will be a permanent feature of the economy and our lives going forward. I'll tell you how we change that. Together, we make this next election in 2016 a national referendum on repealing Obamacare and abolishing the IRS. Number two, we defend our constitutional rights. All of them. We defend the First Amendment, our free speech, our religious liberty. Has religious liberty ever been more under assault than it is right now? Every one of us, our hearts are breaking as we watch what's happening in Indiana and Arkansas. As this perfect storm of the modern Democratic Party and the media and the Fortune 500 all swirl around together attacking religious liberty. You know, there was a time not too long ago that religious liberty was something that brought us together. Republicans and Democrats, we used to argue about marginal tax rates. But when it came to the First Amendment, everyone was on the same page. How heartbreaking how far we've gone in just 2 decades. How extreme and radical the modern Democratic Party is. That they have decided that Christian pastors, that Catholic priests, that Jewish rabbis are now, their religious liberty is unacceptable if it stands in the way of their far left partisan commitment to mandatory gay marriage in all 50 states. This nation was founded by brave men and women fleeing religious oppression and coming here seeking a land where every single one of us could worship God with all of our heart, mind, and soul according to the dictates of our own conscience. And we've got to get back to those principles that built this great nation. We need to defend the Second Amendment. Vice President Joe Biden. You know the nice thing? You don't need a punchline. I promise you it works. The next time you're at a party, just walk up to somebody, put your hands in your pockets, and just say, Vice President Joe Biden. They will crack up laughing 100% of the time. Well, Biden said, if anyone attacks your house, just go outside with a double-barreled shotgun and fire both barrels in the air. Now that is very, very good advice. If it so happens you're being attacked by a flock of geese. We need to defend the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, our rights to privacy. How many of y'all have your cell phones here today? Let me ask you, please leave your cell phones on. I want to make sure President Obama hears every word we say. We need to defend the 10th Amendment. Or as President Obama calls it, the what? The fundamental protection that says the powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. That means there are core functions given to the federal government that it needs to perform well, like defending this nation, like standing with the men and women of our military, like securing the borders. But there are a whole lot of areas where the federal government has no business sticking its nose. Like education. And we need to repeal every word of Common Core. Third critical principle we've got to get back to is we've got to restore America's leadership. For 6 years, we've seen the consequences of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy of leading from behind. And it isn't working. Instead of a president who boycotts Prime Minister Netanyahu, imagine America standing unapologetically with the nation of Israel. Imagine a commander-in-chief who stands up and says, we will defeat radical Islamic terror. And we will call it by its name. And under no circumstances will the nation of Iran be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. Now, every one of these principles are broad-based, common-sense principles that bring us together. They're shared by the vast majority of Americans. So, of course, that means In Washington, D.C., they're viewed as radical and extreme. And I can see some of you thinking, Ted, you're right, we've got to get back to those principles. But can it? How do we make it happen? It seems the promise of America to so many, it feels like it's slipping away. Let me tell you how we do it. It's not going to come from Washington. The only way we reignite the promise of America is for millions of courageous conservatives across South Carolina and across the country to rise up and demand that we change course. I have to tell you, I am powerfully, profoundly optimistic. And the reason I'm optimistic is because of the men and women that do it. I'm optimistic because we ran out of chairs. I'm optimistic because of the unbelievable power of we the people. What we have to do is simple. We got to reassemble the old Reagan coalition. We got to bring together conservatives and libertarians and evangelicals and women and young people and Hispanics and Reagan Democrats. We got to bring together a coalition that represents the American people and that stands for the values that unify us. That more than anything is what Heidi and I are working to do in this campaign. Now I'll tell you, the next year, we're going to spend a lot of time right here in the state of South Carolina. South Carolina historically has played a critical role in our national elections in the Republican Party of ensuring that we nominate a real conservative. And that's the only way we win in November 2016, and we've got to win to turn things around. So I am honored, I am humbled to be here with each of you, to be standing with you, fighting to turn this country around, fighting to get back to the free market principles, to the constitutional liberties that made this country great. Together, we can reignite the promise of America. Together, we can restore that shining city on a hill that is the United States of America. Thank you. So now I'm happy to answer or dodge any question you have. Yes, sir.
Hi, we have a question from Bill Hurd. It's on differentiation. Can you state in less than 5 words how you would set yourself apart from the other Republican contenders?
I can state it in 3 words. A proven conservative. And let me expand on that a little bit. I didn't say I'd stick with it. Heck, you know, I did talk for 21 hours on the 7th floor. But let me tell you the process whereby Heidi and I decided to enter this race. We spent about the last 6 or 9 months thinking about it, praying about it. and really taken a measure of what support we thought we had. And I'll tell you one of the issues that really led us to go forward. If you think of the dozen biggest fights the last couple of years, whether it's stopping Obamacare, whether it's dealing with the debt and debt ceiling that are bankrupting our kids and grandkids, whether it's fighting to stop the president's unconstitutional executive amnesty, whether it's defending the First Amendment, our free speech, our religious liberty, our Second Amendment, our privacy, whether it's standing up to stop Common Core, whether it's standing up for life and marriage, whether it's standing up for the nation of Israel, whether it's standing up to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. You know, as I look at the field, I think there are a lot of good people who are looking at this race, a lot of people who are friends, who I like and respect. But if you look at those dozen issues and you ask, all right, on how many of those issues have they stood up and led? It starts to become a shorter and shorter list. For a lot of them, you can find one, maybe two. But we're not going to win unless we're willing to engage. Margaret Thatcher said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. We saw in 2008 and 2012 Republican nominees who did not take the case to the other side. And that, at the end of the day, was one of the biggest reasons we decided to enter, is that I thought of this field that I've got the strongest record of standing and fighting and leading on the great issues of the day, defending conservative principles, and I think that is the only path to winning in November 2016. So that was a great question from Larry Bird. I got to say, he's got an amazing outside shot. Absolutely yes. And when it comes, let me actually expand on this issue a little bit, connected to the first question. You know, about a month ago, Heidi and I were up in Iowa. We were having lunch with some folks, and a man looked at me and said, Ted, why should I trust you? And I said, you know what? That's the most important question you could ask. And the honest answer is you should. Don't trust any politician. But the point that I made, I said, let me tell you, when I was running for Senate in Texas, I traveled across the state and I'd point out to folks, you know, every candidate has an issues page on their website. And they all say the same darn thing. On every issue, A, B, C, D, and E, they say word for word. You take 5 candidates, print them out in the Republican primary, they all say the exact same thing. You all see this in South Carolina. Every candidate in 2016 is going to come and tell you, I'm the most conservative guy that ever lived. Not a one of them will stand up and say, I'm an establishment moderate who won't stand for anything. They won't say that. So how do you tell the difference? And the point I made when I was campaigning in Texas, I said, if you go to our webpage, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. One of the first things people notice is we don't have an issues page. Instead, we've got a page that's labeled Approve and Rank. And what it says is for too long, politicians have said one thing and done another. Every one of us should ask any politician, any candidate who shows up in front of you, say you believe these things. Show me. When have you stood up and fought for it? When have you bled for it? And what have you accomplished? As the scripture says, you shall know them by their fruit. And what it then says, for the past decade, Ted has been fighting for conservative principles over and over again. And winning on a national level, cold. And what followed was 3 pages of bullet points. So I'll give 2 examples, one general one and then one on religious liberty, the question, because I'm getting back to that. You know, the example I use on the campaign trail all the time is the Second Amendment. Now, every Republican candidate, there is a right answer. I support the Second Amendment. Look, in Texas and South Carolina, unless you are clinically insane, that's the right answer to that. Now, I pointed out on my website, I actually didn't say I support the Second Amendment. Didn't say a word about what was hidden in the deep recesses of my heart. What I did say is that when I was the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state of Texas, in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, we led a coalition of 31 states defending the Second Amendment before the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won a landmark decision upholding that fundamental right. And then I linked to the 2010 Carter Knight Freedom Fund Award given by the NRA every year to one of the leading defenders of the Second Amendment in the country. So let's go to religious liberty. Religious liberty has been a passion of mine for 2 decades. And over again, I've been blessed to have the opportunity to stand up and fight to defend religious liberty. When I was Solicitor General of Texas, we defended the Ten Commandments monument on the state capitol grounds. We went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won 5-4. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance. When the federal appellate court out in California struck it down because it has the words "one nation under God," we brought together all 50 states, went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we won unanimously. And when I was in private practice, I represented over 3 million veterans, represented the American Legion and the VFW, defending the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial. A lone white Latin cross erected over 70 years ago to honor the men and women who gave their lives in World War I. The ACLU sued, seeking to tear it down because they said you cannot have the image of a cross on federal land. And they won. The Federal Court of Appeals and the District Court below it both ordered that Veterans Memorial torn to the ground. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court and we won 5-4. And with what's happening with Indiana, you know, we're seeing a lot of Republican politicians who are scared in their own shadow. And they're running and hiding. I'll tell you, I will not shy away from anyone standing up to defend the religious liberty of every American under the First Amendment.
Senator Cruz, we have a question. I don't have the name of the person that asked it, but
Michael Jordan.
I'm not saying that. What do you think about the Iran?
What do I think about the Iran deal? I think it is a terrible deal. It is not surprising, but I think it's a profound threat to the national security of America and to our allies. Under the terms of this deal, immediately sanctions are relaxed and billions of dollars flow into Iran. They get to keep their centrifuges. They get to keep their enriched uranium. They get to keep advancing their nuclear program. And within 10 years, the deal expires altogether. So 10 years from now, under the terms of this deal, America is okie dokie fine with Iran having a nuclear weapon. Now, I got to say, I think that is an historic mistake reminiscent of Munich in 1938. One of them
says proceed.
it says proceed, and it will only accelerate their acquiring a nuclear weapon. And what we're doing, we're repeating the mistakes that we made in the 1990s with the Clinton administration with North Korea. The 1990s Clinton administration led the world in relaxing sanctions. Billions of dollars flowed into North Korea. And they took the money and built nuclear weapons. Now, the Obama administration literally, I'm not making this up, recruited the very same person that led the failed North Korea talks. Her name is Wendy Sherman. She's our lead negotiator with Iran. They found the one person who screwed this up before. We said, we need you to do it again. Now, with North Korea, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, they're megalomaniacal narcissists. Which means some level of rational deterrence is possible. Because both father and son knew if they ever used a nuclear weapon that day, their regime would be over. The danger with Iran is that it is run by theocratic zealots that embrace death and suicide. The father of the Iranian nuclear program had written in his last will and testament that he wanted written on his tombstone the words, "Here lies a man who sought to annihilate Israel." Last week, in the middle of the negotiations, one of the senior Iranian generals said that the destruction of Israel is non-negotiable. And apparently our administration said, okie doke, that worked for us. I mean, this is... And for anyone that says, well, this is just a challenge for Israel in the Middle East. Iran is a nation, it's not by accident that they call Israel the little Satan and America the great Satan.
Right.
Last year, Supreme Leader Khamenei was speaking to the masses in Tehran. He said, America is the greatest human rights violator on the face of the planet. The crowd began chanting, "Death to America." That's actually a holiday. Every year they celebrate Death to America Day. You know, we have Christmas, 4th of July, Thanksgiving. It's the anniversary of when Iran seized Americans hostage. They celebrated, assemble in masses and chant, "Death to America." If history teaches any lesson, it is that if somebody tells you they want to kill you, believe them. So let me say very briefly what should be done about it. Number one, Congress needs to do everything possible to stop this terror. Be urging every one of my colleagues, every senator, Republican and Democrat, that we need to put the national security interest of this nation above partisan loyalty to the White House. But number two, the Obama White House has indicated it's going to try to circumvent Congress. In 20 months, this president will leave the White House. There are only two ways to make laws under our Constitution: for the president to negotiate a treaty that is ratified by 2/3 of the Senate, or for both houses to pass a law that's signed into law by the president. If this bad deal is not approved by Congress, and it ain't going to be approved by Congress, then this deal will expire on January 20th, 2017, when a new president arrives in the White House. And I'm just going to tell a final story, which is January 20th, 2017. An elderly man walks up to the White House, young Marine standing there guarding him, says, "Excuse me, sir, is Barack Obama here?" The Marine says, "I'm sorry, sir, he doesn't live here anymore." Old man leaves. Next day he comes back. Says, "Excuse me, sir, is Barack Obama here?" Says, "I'm sorry, sir, he doesn't live here." Third day, same old man comes back to the same Marine and says, "Excuse me, sir, is Barack Obama here?" And the Marine kind of sighs. He says, "Sir, I've told you 3 times now. He doesn't live here anymore." Little old man chuckles and goes, "I know that. I just love hearing you say it."
Heather, who are you with? Oh, okay. Are you with a group or? Gotcha.